Hello and welcome to Lenric's realm. I am Matt and this is my overcomplicated attempt to craft some tents in 28mm scale. For the first step I did some research and collected artwork for fantasy style tents. The tents are mainly for my D&D game, so a little exaggerated fantasy vibe is exactly what I'm looking for. I sketched out some tent ideas and went directly to the construction. Second step, recycle. I have way too many delivery boxes at home, so I took one and used it to construct the rough shapes of the tents. And here we already start to get way too complicated. Because I want to use Fimo, a polymer clay, which is hardened via the oven, I cannot use my hot glue gun, although it's right there in the background. Instead, I decided to use PVA glue. Why did I not use super glue at this point? Very good question, I have no idea. I held the individual parts in place with toothpicks and waited for the glue to dry. If you do this, please try not to poke yourself. It is not exactly the fun part of this build. And here we are. The rough shapes of the tents are done, and because I had to wait for the glue to dry, I had no excuse to not clean my desk. For the tent poles, I imagined natural looking sticks and logs, so I used natural occurring sticks. They may be a little chunky for 28mm, but as I said, I wanted a more exaggerated look on my tents. The idea was that the occupants had to gather logs and sticks to construct the tents. If you want a more cleaner and more scale appropriate look, you could use some toothpicks or chopsticks. With the sticks cut to size, I glued them to the cardboard structures. Again, I forgot the existence of superglue and used PVA. The sticks were held in place via tape, and with a bit of drying time, these were now ready for the next step. Enter the clay press. If you use polymer clay for the first time, you will notice that it is very firm and kind of brittle. What you need to do is knead it until it is softer or use the aforementioned clay press. Another thing to keep in mind is you will leave your fingerprints all over the model. To counteract that, you can use cornstarch and powder your fingers. That way you will leave less personal information on your piece. And from here it is just slopping on the clay for the first basic layer, like in miniature painting I guess. I worked in some minor details like the little entrance for one of the tents. You can use your fingers for stuff like that, but I recommend silicone clay shapers when you go to the more detailed work. Also I use some clay softener to get rid of the more obvious fingerprints. With the first layer done, the tents went into the oven for about 30 minutes. Temperatures and baking times are different between polymer clay products, so be sure to read the instructions beforehand. After a little cool down time, I went into the more interesting step, the detail work. I glued on the remaining tent poles with PVA. At this stage I still had a couple of more baking steps before me, so the hot glue gun wasn't an option here. With the poles in place, I started to get into more clay work. I added cuts, patches and wrinkles to the tents to simulate the look of cloth. With the new details, the tents went right back into the oven. Time for power tools. I wanted to add some stitches to add some more detail to the patches and cuts, so I needed to drill some holes in the appropriate places. After that I sewed in some hemp twine, which again is a little out of scale, but it has a nice rough and exaggerated look. I used the same twine for the various rope details like the ties between the poles and the tent cloth. For one tent I wanted to create an overhanging piece of cloth for the entrance. First I built a little wood frame. With wires and a little bit of superglue, which existence I started to remember, I connected it to the tent structure. When that was done, I put a small piece of clay on top of it. I worked out my fingerprints and made the connection to the rest of the tent seamless. After that, the tent went right back into the oven. After this baking step, I shortened the overhang a little bit and added more wrinkles to add more details. I added more details to the other tents as well, like an animal fur or rope stitches. Now to the last detail step. A while back I backed the Dungeons & Lasers 2 campaign and I got a lot of material for little details. In this case I took a lamp from the stretch goals and I put it on one of the tents. I also added shields and a resin raven, both by tabletop art. And with that, the tents are ready for paint. Hardened polymer clay can be painted like every plastic or MDF kit, just give it a prime and start with the fun stuff. I used mainly my airbrush here, but with standard techniques like base coating and dry brushing, you can get easily good results. The tent cloth got a base coat with a sandy off-white. After that, I added a bit of sepia ink to get a bit of variety to the pieces. On some details, like the patches or the wood, I worked with Citadel's contrast paints, while on other details, like the lamp, I used standard acrylics. And with that, the tents are ready for the next RPG adventure or for your tabletop wargame. If you liked the video, please give it a like and subscribe. I plan to make more fun stuff like that in the future. Until then, farewell, fellow adventurers.